She was worth $3 billion, ran a company of 12,000 people, and had never once in her adult life asked anyone for help. Then she looked at a mechanic standing in her lobby, grease still on his knuckles, a delivery receipt folded in his back pocket, and said the words she had never said to anyone. "I need you to be my boyfriend. Tonight." He didn't laugh. He didn't ask why. He just checked his watch and said, "Sure. What time are we leaving?" And that was the moment Scarlett Hayes realized she was in serious trouble. If this story hooks you in the first 60 seconds, hit like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Follow along and don't leave before the ending. You won't see it coming. The car came in on a Tuesday. It was a 2023 Bentley Continental GT, silver gray with cream leather interior, and someone had driven it hard enough to burn the clutch and crack the oil pan gasket. Whoever owned it hadn't noticed or hadn't cared until the engine started running rough and the low-pressure warning lit up the dashboard like a Christmas ornament. By the time it arrived at Brooks Auto on the back of a flatbed tow, the damage was already a few hundred miles past inconvenient. Ethan Brooks walked around the car twice before he touched it. He did that with every vehicle, a slow lap, hands in his pockets, just looking. His old boss at the dealership used to say it was a waste of time. Ethan had stopped working for that man 11 years ago, which he considered one of the better decisions of his life. The slow walk told him things, the way a car sat on its tires, where the weight had shifted, what the driver used, and what they ignored. You could learn a lot about a person from the way they treated a machine that cost more than most people made in 5 years. This one had been pushed. The tires were worn unevenly, right front worse than the left, which meant either an alignment problem or someone who liked to take corners faster than the car preferred. There were faint scratches on the lower door panels, consistent with narrow parking garages. The passenger seat was clean. Driver's seat was not. Whoever owned this car spent a lot of time in it alone. He crouched near the front bumper and looked underneath. "Bad?" said a voice behind him. Darnell, his only full-time employee, was leaning against the bay door with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who already knew the answer and was mostly asking out of sympathy. "Could have been worse if they drove it another week," Ethan said. "Gasket's gone. Need to pull the pan, reseal it, replace the clutch assembly. Probably 2 days. Nice car for somebody not to notice a warning light." "Nice cars for people who don't notice things," Ethan said, and stood up. He snapped a photo of the VIN for the work order. "You finished the Tahoe?" "Waiting on the brake rotors. Should be here before noon." "Good. I'll start on this one when Mia's off to school." He said it without looking up from the clipboard, already writing down the initial assessment in the shorthand he'd been using since he was 19 years old. Apprenticed under a retired mechanic named Bill Kowalski, who'd smelled like cigarettes and motor oil and had never in his life given a compliment that wasn't earned. Ethan had learned more from Bill in 3 years than most people learn in a decade of formal training. He'd also learned that the work didn't wait for your problems to get sorted. You showed up, you did the job, you went home. He'd been doing that since his wife died. Mia was 8 years old and had opinions about everything. She had opinions about breakfast, specifically that scrambled eggs needed hot sauce or they were just yellow nothing, and about which road they should take to school, and about whether it was going to rain, and she was almost always right about the rain. She had her mother's eyes and Ethan's stubbornness, and a laugh that could fill a room so completely it left no space for anything heavy. That Tuesday morning she was arguing about her hair. "I want to do it myself," she said, standing in front of the bathroom mirror with a brush in one hand and a look of absolute determination that Ethan recognized as his own face, reflected back at him through 7 years of small daily negotiations. "You've been saying that for 20 minutes. I almost have it. Mia, school starts in 12 minutes and we still need to find your left shoe." She looked at him in the mirror. "It's under the couch." "How do you know that?" "Because I kicked it there last night by accident." He stared at her. "And you didn't say anything?" "I forgot." She put the brush down. "Can you do the braid?" He could do the braid. It had taken him 4 months of YouTube tutorials and a lot of patience that he hadn't known he had until he needed it, and now he could do a passable French braid in under 3 minutes, which was the kind of skill no one warned you about when you became a single parent. You just figured it out, because the alternative was your daughter going to school looking like someone had dragged her backward through a hedge, and she deserved better than that. He did the braid. He found the shoe. They made it to school with 2 minutes to spare. "Dad?" Mia said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Yeah. Can we make spaghetti tonight?" "Sure." "With the thing on top?" "The Parmesan." "Yes." She kissed his cheek and ran toward the building without looking back, which was typical. She trusted he'd be there when she needed him and didn't make a production of it. He sat in the car for a moment after she disappeared through the doors, watching the building like he always did, that old habit of just making sure, and then he put it in drive and went back to the shop. The Bentley took most of the day. He pulled the oil pan, which was worse than expected. The gasket had been failing for a while, and some metal particulate had worked its way into places it shouldn't be. He flushed the system, replaced the filter, and resealed everything with the kind of methodical attention that had built his shop's reputation over the past 6 years. People brought him the difficult jobs, the ones other shops had given up on or misdiagnosed. He didn't advertise. He didn't need to. He was under the car when his phone rang. The number on the screen belonged to Crestfield Holdings, the corporate parent listed in the work order. "Brooks Auto," he said. "Yes, hello. This is Charlotte Reed, executive assistant to Ms. Hayes. I'm calling about the Continental GT we sent in for service." "What can I do for you, Ms. Reed?" "Ms. Hayes needs the vehicle returned to our downtown headquarters by 3 o'clock this afternoon. She has a commitment this evening, and the car is part of the arrangement." A pause. "I understand it's short notice. We're prepared to add a service surcharge for the inconvenience." Ethan looked at the car. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:40. "It'll be ready," he said. There was a brief silence. "You're certain? The last shop we used told us, 'It'll be ready by 2:30. Send me the address.'" He hung up and told Darnell he'd need to push lunch. Crestfield Holdings occupied a glass tower in the financial district that had clearly been designed by someone who wanted people to feel small when they walked into the lobby. Ethan had been in buildings like this before. Not often, but enough to know the kind of attention they attracted and the kind they withheld. The security desk required 2 forms of ID and a temporary visitor badge to enter, even to drop off a car key, and the lobby smelled like a combination of fresh flowers and money that had been circulating long enough to lose any trace of where it came from. He parked the Bentley in the reserved space near the entrance as he'd been directed, locked it, and walked inside with the key and a copy of the completed work order. The receptionist, young, efficient, already reaching for the phone before he finished introducing himself, made a call and told him to wait. He sat in one of the chairs near the window and looked out at the street. A delivery truck was double parked, hazards blinking, the driver moving boxes with the particular focused speed of someone who had 17 more stops and no patience for obstacles. Ethan watched him for a moment and felt something like kinship. "Mr. Brooks." He looked up. The woman walking toward him was not what he'd expected, though he couldn't have said exactly what he had expected. She was probably 30, maybe a year or two either side, in a dark blazer over a cream blouse, and she moved the way people moved when they were accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around them. Not aggressive exactly, but certain. Like the path was already cleared before she took a step. Her hair was dark and pulled back without fuss. She had the kind of face that was composed by habit, not by ease. There was a tightness around her jaw that suggested she'd been having the kind of day where things kept not going the way she'd planned. She stopped a few feet away from him and looked him over the way he'd looked over her car. The slow assessment of someone trying to determine what they were dealing with. "You're the mechanic," she said. It wasn't a question, so he didn't treat it like one. "Ethan Brooks. Your car's in the reserve space out front. There's a copy of the full service report." He handed her the paperwork. The gasket was the main issue, but there was also metal particulate in the oil system. That's been flushed and the filter replaced. You'll want to check the oil level in about 300 miles, just to be certain, and the front alignment is off. That's a separate job, but I'd get to it within the next month. She took the paperwork without looking at it. She was looking at him. "You drove it here yourself," she said. "That's how we handle luxury deliveries. Easier than a flatbed for a finished job." "And you took the highway?" "Yes. Why? He shrugged. Wanted to make sure the seal held under load before I signed off on it. Something shifted in her expression, almost imperceptibly. She looked at the paperwork in her hand and then back at him. The last shop we used for this car told us the engine noise was just the brand's natural acoustic signature. We found out 6 months later it was a cracked manifold. Different shop, Ethan said. Clearly. She was quiet for a moment. The lobby hummed around them, phones ringing at the distant reception desk, the soft percussion of heels on marble, the elevator opening and closing with a tone like an expensive afterthought. Scarlett Hayes stood in the middle of it as if it were all just background noise she'd learned to filter. What do I owe you? He handed her the itemized invoice. She glanced at it and didn't flinch, which meant either she was very accustomed to large bills or she was very good at not showing reactions. He suspected both. Her assistant materialized behind her with a corporate card and processed the payment in under 2 minutes. Ethan was putting his copy of the receipt in his jacket pocket when Scarlett Hayes said, quietly and without any particular preamble, "I need you to stay for a moment." He stopped. She was looking at her phone, or pretending to, and there was something different in her voice. The certainty was still there, but it had a crack in it. Like something she'd rehearsed was already coming apart before she'd said it. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to know that I am fully aware of how strange this is." Ethan waited. Scarlett looked up from the phone. She met his eyes directly, the way people did when they were trying to project confidence and were working slightly harder at it than usual. "I need someone to accompany me to a family gathering tonight at my parents' home outside the city." A breath. "I need someone to pose as to be introduced as my partner, my boyfriend." The lobby continued its efficient hum around them. Someone walked past with a rolling suitcase. The elevator opened and closed. Ethan looked at her for a moment, long enough that she began to look like she regretted saying it. Then he said, "What time are we leaving?" Scarlett Hayes, who had negotiated contracts worth 9 figures, who had stood in front of hostile board meetings and turned the temperature of the room through force of will alone, who had not been surprised by anything in a professional context in approximately 3 years, stared at him. What? What time?" he said. "I need to arrange pickup for my daughter. She gets out at 3:15. It took Scarlett a full 5 seconds to recover. She brought him upstairs to a corner office on the 32nd floor where the city spread out beneath the windows in every direction, like something that had been arranged for her benefit. The office was neat without being bare. A desk that was covered in organized working chaos, 2 chairs across from it, a credenza stacked with folders, and 1 overfull coffee mug near the edge that looked like it had been there since morning and forgotten. She sat behind the desk, but didn't look entirely comfortable there, which he noticed. He sat in one of the chairs across and waited while she figured out where to start. "You didn't ask why," she said. "You said you'd explain." "I said I wanted you to know it was strange." "You were going to explain after that." She looked at him again in that assessing way. "Most people would have asked immediately." "I figured you'd get there." She folded her hands on the desk. Her ring finger was bare, which told him something, and her nails were short and unadorned, which told him something else. "My family has been pressuring me since my last relationship ended, my mother in particular." She said my mother with the specific flatness of someone compressing a complicated feeling into 2 words. "There is a family dinner tonight. It happens every few months, and I told my mother last week. I said it without thinking because she was pressing me and I was exhausted and I just wanted her to stop. I told her I was seeing someone. So now you need someone." "I had someone. I had a colleague." We'd agreed to an arrangement. He called this morning to tell me he'd accepted a position at a competing firm and felt it would be ethically complicated to continue. She said ethically complicated with the precise intonation of someone quoting a phrase that had annoyed them deeply, which left me with 4 hours and no options. And I walked in. "You walked in." She unclenched her hands and looked out the window. "I'm aware this is absurd." "A little," Ethan agreed. "I'm aware you have no reason to agree to this." "I said yes already." "You said yes before you knew anything about it." "I figured if it was something I couldn't live with, you'd tell me and I'd say no." He leaned back in the chair. "What do I need to know?" There was a long pause. Scarlett looked at him like she was still trying to determine what category he fit in, and the fact that he wasn't fitting into any of the usual ones was either reassuring or deeply inconvenient, and she hadn't decided which. Then she started talking. Her parents' home was 40 miles outside the city on a private lake. Her father, Gerald Hayes, was 71, semi-retired, and had built his first company before Scarlett was born, a construction firm that had eventually expanded into real estate development. He had strong opinions about cars, weak opinions about small talk, and a persistent suspicion of anyone he hadn't vetted personally, a trait he had apparently passed to his daughter. Her mother, Diane, was 68 and had been managing the family's social architecture for 40 years with the focused energy of someone running a long-term campaign. She had never worked outside the home, which she had made into a life's work in itself, and she had a gift for asking questions that sounded like small talk and functioned like surgical instruments. Her grandmother, her father's mother, Eleanor, was 92, still sharp, and had been known to say things at dinner tables that other people only thought. She'd liked Scarlett's last serious boyfriend and had told him so directly, and then when it ended had told Scarlett she understood why with the same directness, which Scarlett still wasn't sure whether to resent or appreciate. There were also two cousins who would be there, Philip and Amanda, both around Scarlett's age, both successful in the particular way of people who had started with significant advantages and had also worked reasonably hard, and both possessed of the family habit of treating every gathering as an opportunity for low-level competitive positioning. "That's the family," Scarlett said. "What's the story you told your mother about me?" She hesitated. "Not much. I said you were someone I'd met outside of work, that you were—" "I said you were grounded. That was the word I used." "Why that word?" She picked up a pen from the desk and turned it between her fingers. "Because she always says I choose men who are as work-obsessed as I am, and that it never works because nobody wants to be with their own mirror. So I told her you were different, grounded." She looked at him. "I didn't have a story attached to it. I said the word and then she asked if she'd be meeting you soon, and I panicked and said yes and hung up." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I'm a mechanic," he said. "Shop owner. Been doing it for 11 years, 6 years on my own. I have one full-time employee and one part-time. I have a daughter who's 8, Mia. Her mother died 4 years ago. I live about 15 minutes from my shop, which is in Cartwell. That's a real answer to most of what your family will ask." Scarlett looked at him for a long moment. "You're not going to pretend to be something else." "I'm not very good at pretending," he said, "and the story you told your mother already fits. You just need to fill it in." She turned the pen over again. "My family is going to push. My cousins especially. They'll ask about money. They'll ask about what you think about my work, my schedule. Philip will almost certainly say something designed to be uncomfortable." "Okay? You're not bothered by that?" "I'll handle it when it gets there." "How?" He shrugged. "By answering honestly, mostly. People who ask uncomfortable questions usually expect you to squirm. If you don't, they get bored." Scarlett stared at him. "You've met my family before?" "I've met people," he said simply. He called Darnell from the parking garage. "I need you to take over pickup today. 3:15. Mia from Cartwell Elementary. She'll be expecting me, so text her teacher to let her know it'll be you." "Everything all right?" Darnell asked. "Fine, change of plans. Can you do dinner too? There's stuff in the fridge. Mia knows where the pasta is." A pause. "Does Mia know I'm a worse cook than you?" "She knows. She's gracious about it." He looked up at the level indicator on the wall of the garage. "I'll explain when I'm back." "You're being weird." "I'm always weird." "You're being a different kind of weird." "Goodbye, Darnell." He hung up and went to get his truck. Mom. Scarlett saw the truck and said nothing for a moment. It was a 2015 Ford F-150, dark blue, with a scratch along the passenger side that had been partially filled in with touch-up paint and a rear bumper sticker that said Cartwell Auto Fair 2022 because Mia had put it there and he hadn't had the heart to remove it. It was clean, mechanically spotless. He serviced it himself. But it was not the kind of vehicle that matched the Bentley she was accustomed to. "We can take my car," she said. "I thought you wanted me to drive." "You don't have to drive." "Your car's been through enough today." He opened the passenger door. Besides, you want your family to think you're seeing a mechanic from Cartwell. Showing up in a Bentley complicates the story. She stood on the sidewalk outside the tower and looked at the truck, and looked at him and said, with the expression of someone making an internal adjustment, "Fine." She got in the truck. He noticed she didn't check the seat before sitting down, which meant either she trusted him more than she should have, or she was better at flexibility than her reputation suggested. Probably both. They were on the highway before she started actually preparing him. "My father will ask about your business," she said, "specifically margins and growth. He's old school. He respects numbers." "Shop's profitable," Ethan said. "Modest scale but no debt. I own the building." "You own it?" "Bought it 4 years ago. Rates were bad, but I had the down payment and I didn't want to keep giving money to a landlord." He glanced at the lane beside him and changed position cleanly. "It's a half-mile from my house. Used to belong to a guy named Kowalski. He sold it to me for less than market value because he trusted me not to turn it into something else." Scarlett was quiet for a moment. "My father will like that." "Good. He won't like that you drove up without calling ahead." "You made that call," Ethan said. "I just delivered a car." "I know. I'm saying, if he mentions it, I'll tell him the truth. You needed someone, and I said yes." "You're very comfortable with the truth. It's easier to keep track of." She looked out the passenger window at the highway median passing in a blur of brown grass and orange traffic cones. "My mother is going to ask about Mia." "Mia's easy to talk about. You're not worried she'll ask personal questions about Mia's mother?" Ethan was quiet for a second. Sophie died from a brain aneurysm. She was 29. Mia was 4. There's nothing complicated about it, just hard. He said it the way he always said it. Not like a wound exactly, more like a scar, something that had become part of the terrain. "If your mother asks, I'll answer. She's allowed to be curious." Scarlett turned from the window and looked at him. He could feel it without looking. The recalibration happening in real time. "Most people find that conversation difficult to navigate with strangers," she said. "It's not navigating, it's just saying what happened." "There's a difference?" "Yeah," he said. "Navigating means you're trying to get somewhere. I'm not trying to get anywhere. Sophie died. Mia and I kept going. That's the whole story." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable. The kind that comes after something real has been said and there's no useful thing to add to it. After a mile or so, Scarlett said, "She sounds like she mattered." "She did," Ethan said, and left it at that. The lakeside property was everything the description had implied. It sat at the end of a quarter-mile gravel drive lined with old oak trees, the kind of trees that took 50 years to grow that large and that someone had had the foresight to plant anyway. The house itself was stone and cedar, 3 stories with a wraparound porch, tucked into the landscape rather than imposed on it. Not a showpiece, a home that had been used for decades, a dock extended out over the lake, and a small motorboat was tied to it with a rope that had been knotted and reknotted over many summers. Ethan pulled in and parked near a row of other vehicles. A Mercedes, 2 Audis, a Land Rover. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment. "Ready?" Scarlett asked. "One thing first," he said. He turned to look at her directly. "If this gets uncomfortable for you at any point, just tell me and I'll find a reason to leave. I don't need a script. I'll follow your lead." She looked at him for a long moment. "You said you weren't good at pretending." "I'm not, but I'm decent at reading a room." She nodded once and reached for the door handle. They walked up the porch steps together. Scarlett knocked once on the heavy wooden door, which struck him as slightly formal for your own parents' house, but he filed it away. And then the door opened, and a woman who was clearly her mother appeared. Diane Hayes was shorter than her daughter by a few inches, with silver hair cut precisely and the kind of posture that suggested she'd been told to stand straight at a young age and had never stopped. She had Scarlett's cheekbones and the particular warmth of someone who used warmth strategically, which wasn't the same thing as not meaning it. She probably meant some of it. She looked at her daughter and then at Ethan, and something in her face rearranged itself with the speed of long practice. "Scarlett." She pulled her daughter in for a brief, firm hug. Then she looked at Ethan. "And you must be Ethan Brooks," he said, and extended his hand. Not too firm, not too soft. It's good to meet you, Mrs. Hayes. Thank you for having me. Diane took his hand, held it a beat longer than a normal handshake, and looked at him. You're a mechanic, she said. Yes, ma'am. A brief pause. Scarlett said you were grounded. She left out the rest. She wasn't sure how much to give away up front, Ethan said. I'm still figuring out if that was strategic or if she just wanted to see how you'd react. There was a silence of about 2 seconds, and then Diane Hayes laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of her. She looked at her daughter. I like him already, she said, which Ethan noted seemed to make Scarlett simultaneously relieved and slightly alarmed. Potapok. Gerald Hayes was in the garage. He'd been introduced at the door and had shaken Ethan's hand with the grip of a man who had worked with his hands for 30 years and still believed handshakes communicated important information, which Ethan respected. Then he'd said, almost apologetically, that he was just dealing with something in the garage and would be in for dinner. Ethan had followed him without being invited, not as a power move. He genuinely noticed, on the way from the car to the front door, that Gerald had the particular look of a man whose mind was mostly somewhere else. And when they'd passed the side of the house with the open garage door, Ethan had caught a glimpse of a small motorboat on a trailer, half disassembled, with a Mercury outboard engine that had the distinct look of a cooling system problem. He leaned against the garage doorframe and looked at it. Gerald was crouching beside the engine, a wrench in his hand, frowning. Mercury 60? Ethan said. Gerald looked up. 50. Thing's been running hot for 3 weeks. Marina said it was the impeller. Replaced it, and it's still doing it. Ethan walked over and crouched on the other side. He looked at the thermostat housing without touching anything. You let the marina mechanic pull the head to confirm? He said he didn't need to. He was wrong. Ethan looked at the housing more closely. You've got calcium buildup on the thermostat. It's not opening all the way. The impeller was probably fine. He straightened. You got a bucket, some distilled white vinegar, and about 2 hours before dinner? Gerald Hayes looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man who had been disappointed by confident assessments before. Then he went to get the bucket. They worked through the later part of the afternoon, Ethan doing most of the actual repair, and Gerald passing him tools and asking questions. Not the kind designed to test, but the genuine kind, the ones that come from someone who used to know how to do something and wants to understand it again. Gerald had a good mechanical instinct buried under decades of delegation, and it showed when he asked the right question at the right moment. At one point, without looking up from the thermostat housing, Gerald said, How long have you two been seeing each other? Not long, Ethan said honestly, but long enough. She tell you about Marcus? Ethan didn't know who Marcus was. He filed it for later. She mentioned her last relationship ended. Ended. Gerald made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He spent 2 years trying to get a seat on her board and called it a relationship. She worked it out eventually. A pause. She works everything out eventually. Takes her longer than it should sometimes, but she gets there. She seems sharp. She's the sharpest person I know, Gerald said simply. And I've known a lot of people. He picked up a rag and wiped his hands. You're not looking at her company. It wasn't a question. I have my own company, Ethan said. Gerald looked at him. It's smaller than hers, Ethan said, by a significant margin, but it's mine. Another long pause. The evening light was shifting through the trees at the edge of the property, long and golden, and somewhere inside the house voices were filtering through. Laughter, Diane calling someone's name, the sound of a kitchen in organized chaos. You hungry? Gerald said finally. Getting there, Ethan said. Gerald nodded. Help me put this back together and I'll make sure you get the good seat at the table. Dinner was 12 people around a long table that had probably hosted 50 years of the family's important moments. Ethan sat between Scarlett and her grandmother, Eleanor, who was thin and white-haired and had the undivided attention of someone who'd stopped caring about distractions approximately 40 years ago. Eleanor had waited until the bread was passed before she turned to look at him directly and said, with no greeting attached, Scarlett tells me you have a daughter. Mia, Ethan said. She's 8. What's she like? Loud, smart, strong opinions about eggs. Eleanor considered this. That's good. The quiet ones worry me. What's she think about you being here tonight? She doesn't know I'm here tonight. Sensible. You didn't want to explain it before you knew how it would go. Something like that. Eleanor nodded slowly. I like you, she said. You have a direct face. She turned back to her plate, apparently satisfied, and helped herself to the potatoes. Scarlett, beside him, was eating without looking up, and he noticed she'd relaxed slightly. In the shoulders, in the line of her jaw. Small physical things, not a mood, just the body releasing something it had been holding. Philip, across the table, was watching. He was about Scarlett's age, with the look of someone who'd been told he was charming often enough that he'd started to believe it was the same as being interesting. He'd shaken Ethan's hand at introductions with the particular vigor of a man establishing a hierarchy, and had spent most of the meal making observations that were technically contributions to conversation and functionally auditions. He waited until the main course was being cleared before he leaned forward slightly. So, Ethan, Brooks, right? You run an auto shop in Cartwell. That's right. Good business? I hear the margins on independent shops can be tough. They can be, Ethan said, but yours is doing well? Well enough. Philip smiled. Well enough is a careful answer. It's an honest one, Ethan said pleasantly. I don't know you well enough to share my financials. There was a brief pause. Amanda, beside Philip, covered a smile with her wine glass. Philip tried another angle. You and Scarlett seem like an unusual match. Her world is very different from... Philip, Scarlett said. Her voice was flat. I'm just saying it's interesting. The CEO and the mechanic. It's a story. He said it like he was being generous. Ethan set down his fork and looked at him without any particular heat. Most good things are unusual matches, he said. I think unusual is doing a lot of work in that sentence that the rest of it doesn't earn. Another pause. Diane, at the head of the table, looked from Philip to Ethan with the expression of someone watching a chessboard rearrange itself. Philip took a sip of wine, didn't push further. Eleanor, without looking up from her plate, said, I told you, Philip. Direct face. After dinner, Scarlett found him on the porch. The lake was dark and flat, lit from beneath by the reflection of the house lights, and from above by a sky that had cleared over the past hour and now held more stars than the city ever allowed you to see. Ethan was standing at the railing with a cup of coffee. Diane had appeared with one without him asking, which meant Gerald had said something in the kitchen, and looking at the water. Scarlett came to stand beside him, close enough to maintain the impression for anyone who might look through the window, far enough to make clear they were still strangers. You fixed my father's boat, she said. Thermostat was blocked. 40-minute job. He asked me about you in the kitchen. What did he say? He said, she paused, where'd you find this one? She said it with the particular tone of someone quoting and not quite sure what to do with the quote, which from him is significant. Good. Don't be smug about it. I'm not smug. I'm just glad it went okay. She was quiet for a moment. The lake made small sounds against the dock pilings below. You were easy with them, she said. It came out like an observation she hadn't fully decided to share. With my family, I kept waiting for you to misread something or push in the wrong direction, or get intimidated, he offered. I wasn't going to say it like that. You could have said it like that. It's fine. He looked at the lake. Your family is specific. They're not easy, but they're not hard in the way I think you think they are. She turned to look at his profile. What does that mean? It means your father just wants to know if someone's honest. Your mother wants to know if someone will take care of you, even if that's not how she frames the question. Your grandmother wants to know if someone's real. None of that's complicated. They're just asking it in the way your family asks things. He picked up the coffee cup. The cousins are more complicated, but they're not really the main event. The porch door opened and Diane appeared with a sweater she insisted on giving Scarlett, and there was a brief, warm negotiation about whether Scarlett needed it, which Ethan watched from the rail while drinking his coffee and which told him more about the two of them than dinner had. The small moments always did. When Diane went back inside, Scarlett pulled the sweater on with the expression of someone who had lost an argument they'd been having for 30 years and had made peace with it. Ethan looked at the lake. "Thank you," Scarlett said quietly. Not the professional version. Something smaller and realer said to the water as much as to him. "You don't have to thank me." "I think I do." "Fair enough." They stood there for a while longer, the lake doing what lakes do in the dark, the house behind them full of the quiet sounds of a family settling into the end of the evening, and neither of them said much else, which was, for two people who were still, technically, strangers, less uncomfortable than it should have been. She noticed that too. He could tell by the small, brief look she gave him before she turned back toward the house. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't need to. The drive back was quieter than the drive out. Scarlett had her phone in her hand but wasn't using it. Ethan kept his eyes on the dark road, the headlights opening a corridor of light ahead of them through the trees. At some point, Scarlett leaned her head slightly against the passenger window, and the tension he'd been watching all evening in her face had gone somewhere else. He drove past the exit for the city. She didn't notice for a minute. Then, "You passed the exit." "I know." "Why?" "There's road construction on 7th. The highway's faster at this hour, but the last 2 miles into the financial district will add 20 minutes. She looked at him. "How do you know that?" "I drive a lot of delivery roads." She looked back out the window. "Right." After a moment she said, almost to herself, "It actually worked." "You seem surprised." "I planned for it to work. It's different from it working." "What did you plan for if it didn't?" "A headache and a long explanation to my mother." A beat. "The headache would have happened either way. She's already texted me twice." He smiled at the windshield. They didn't talk again until he pulled up in front of the tower. The city was doing what the city did at 11:30 on a Tuesday. Thinning, but not quiet, the kind of alive that wasn't about people anymore, but about infrastructure, the hum of things keeping themselves running. She got out and then turned back, one hand on the door. "I'll have Charlotte transfer a fee to you," she said, "for your time tonight." "You already paid for the car." This was separate. "This was me having dinner with a family I hadn't met and fixing a boat," Ethan said. "I don't need a fee for that." She looked at him. The door was still open. "Most people would take it." "I'm not most people." It landed differently than he meant it, or maybe exactly as he meant it. He wasn't entirely sure. Either way, she stood there for a second looking at him, with an expression that had stopped being the composed, strategic face she'd had in her office and become something else, something that was figuring something out. "No," she said quietly. "You're not." She closed the door and walked into the lobby without looking back. He sat in the truck until he saw the elevator light behind the glass. Then he put it in drive and pointed it toward home. Mia would want to hear about the boat engine. That, at least, he knew how to explain. He didn't hear from her for 4 days. That was fine. He hadn't expected to. What they'd done Tuesday night was a transaction with an unusual currency, his time and presence in exchange for nothing concrete, which was either the most straightforward thing he'd done in a while or the strangest, depending on how he looked at it. He'd driven home, checked on Mia, listened to Darnell's mildly offended account of the spaghetti dinner that had apparently not gone well. "She said my sauce tasted like just tomatoes, Ethan, like that's an insult," and gone to bed at 11:30 like it was any other Tuesday. Wednesday was the Tahoe and 2 oil changes. Thursday was a transmission job that ran long and a call from a fleet service looking for a new vendor. Friday. Mia had a thing at school, a presentation about animals, which she'd been preparing for 2 weeks with the seriousness of a doctoral dissertation. And he sat in a plastic chair in the 3rd grade classroom and watched her explain the migration patterns of monarch butterflies with a poster she'd made herself, some of the lettering slightly crooked, which she'd refused to redo because she said it had character. He didn't think about the lakeside house, or the dinner table, or the woman who'd looked at him from the truck window like she was still processing a math problem that had produced an unexpected result. He thought about it a little. Friday evening, after Mia was in bed, his phone buzzed with a number he'd saved under S. Hayes, Bentley. The board dinner ran until 10, I just got home. This is a strange text to send to someone. He read it twice. Then he typed, stranger than asking a delivery driver to be your boyfriend? 3 minutes passed. Then, fair point. How was your week? It wasn't a question exactly, more like someone who had thought about whether to ask and decided to go ahead. He wrote back, Mia's butterfly presentation was Friday. She did well. Did you take pictures? About 30. Send one. He looked at the message for a second, surprised. Then he scrolled back through his camera roll to the one where Mia was mid-sentence, one hand pointing at a hand-drawn monarch butterfly diagram, completely absorbed in her own explanation, and sent it. The response came quickly. She looks like she's running a Senate hearing. He laughed at that. Actually laughed. Sitting in his kitchen with a half-empty glass of water and the refrigerator humming behind him, and the sound of it in the quiet house felt a little foreign, and also fine. She gets that from her mother, he typed. Then after a second, how was your week? Long, complicated. I have a thing tomorrow I could use a second opinion on. What kind of thing? Technically a brunch. My mother wants to thank you. She called my assistant. He put the phone down, picked it up again. She called your assistant to thank me. My mother treats social obligations with the same organizational energy she gives everything else. Charlotte has a calendar entry for it. A pause, then, you don't have to come. I told her I'd ask. I've done that now. He thought about it for approximately 5 seconds. What time? Brunch was at a restaurant in the kind of neighborhood that didn't have parking meters because everyone who ate there arrived by car service. Ethan parallel parked the truck between a Lexus and a BMW and walked in, and Diane Hayes stood up from a table near the window and hugged him like they'd known each other for years, which was either a cultural thing or a personality thing, and he wasn't sure it mattered. Scarlett was already seated. She was in a cream-colored jacket, hair down for once, and she looked different from the way she'd looked in her office or at the dinner. Slightly less armored, though he couldn't have said precisely where the difference was. The jaw was a little looser. She hadn't looked up immediately when he walked in, and when she did, the brief look she gave him was, he noticed it and filed it away without naming it. Diane ordered for the table like she did it everywhere, with a comfortable authority that wasn't rude and wasn't exactly asking. She wanted to know about Mia, not in the way some people asked about kids, with polite half-attention, but specifically the butterfly presentation, what grade she was in, what she was reading lately, whether she played any sports. Ethan answered everything without performing modesty or pride, just describing his daughter the way he always did, as a person he happened to know well. She sounds exceptional, Diane said. She's a lot, Ethan said. Exceptional is in there. Diane turned to Scarlett with the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was making it visible. You should bring her to the lake sometime. Gerald would love it. Scarlett looked at her mother steadily. She's not mine to bring. She could be invited. Mom, I'm making conversation. You're making a point. I'm doing both, Diane said serenely, and took a sip of her coffee, and that was the end of that particular exchange. After brunch, Diane went to find the restroom, and Scarlett sat across from him with the look of someone who was going to say something they'd been deciding about for a few days. She likes you, Scarlett said. I know. She's going to keep inviting you to things. Okay. It's going to get complicated. She turned her water glass on the table. I don't have a good answer for the part that comes after this. The part where I'm supposed to fade out as a fake boyfriend and nobody wonders why. Yes. He looked at her. Does it have to be that? She met his eyes. What else would it be? He didn't have an answer to that, which was its own kind of answer. She didn't push it. Diane came back and ordered dessert for everyone without asking, and Ethan ate his and let the question sit where it had landed, uncomplicated by anything further. The invitation for the following weekend came from Gerald directly. He texted Ethan's number. Scarlett had apparently shared it without mentioning she was going to, with a message that was 3 sentences long and contained 0 pleasantries. Engines running clean, took it out this morning, figured you should know. And then, we're doing a late lunch Saturday. Bring the girl if she wants to come. He showed Mia the message that evening. She was eating cereal at the kitchen counter, reading a library book about deep-sea creatures, and she looked at his phone with the particular squint she used for things that required evaluation. "Who's Gerald?" "Father of someone I've been spending some time with." "A girl someone or a work someone?" "A girl someone," Ethan said. Mia looked at him with an expression that was several things at once. He'd been waiting for this, in the abstract, for a couple of years. The moment when it stopped being just the two of them, plus Darnell and occasionally Mrs. Patterson from next door, and became something that required explanation. He hadn't figured out the explanation yet. "Do you like her?" Mia asked. "I don't know her very well yet." "That's not what I asked. You're 8. "You keep saying that like it means I don't understand things," Mia said, and turned back to her book. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the back of his daughter's head, at the braid he'd done that morning, and which was already half undone, the way they always were by end of day. He thought about what to say and couldn't find anything that was both honest and simple, so he didn't say anything. "I'll come to the lake thing," Mia said, without looking up. "I want to see if the boat works now." Mia met the Hayes family the way she met everyone, with the unself-conscious candor of a person who had not yet learned to perform herself for an audience. She shook Gerald's hand and told him his boat was probably running better because her dad had fixed it, which was factually true and also slightly territorial, and Gerald looked like he appreciated both things. She told Eleanor she had nice earrings, which she did. She asked Diane whether there was a dog anywhere on the property, and when the answer was no, said, "Okay," with the specific tone of a person revising their expectations downward and accepting it. With Scarlett, she was careful. Ethan noticed it because he'd expected her to be less so. Mia was not a shy child. She walked into rooms like she'd been there before, talked to adults like they were peers, and had no particular use for the kind of deference that children were sometimes coached into. But around Scarlett, she was observing, watching, measuring, running whatever internal assessment 8-year-old children ran. After lunch, they ended up on the dock, Mia, Ethan, and Scarlett, because Mia had wanted to see the water and had announced this in a tone that was more instruction than request, and they'd followed. Mia sat on the edge of the dock with her legs hanging over the side, looking down at the water with the fascinated attention she gave to anything she wanted to understand. Scarlett sat a few feet away, jacket folded in her lap, shoes off for the first time Ethan had seen. "Do you have kids?" Mia asked her. "No," Scarlett said. "Do you want them?" Ethan said, "Mia?" "It's fine," Scarlett said. She looked at Mia. "I don't know. I haven't figured that part out yet. My dad says that about a lot of things." "Does he?" "He says I'm still figuring it out when he doesn't know the answer but doesn't want to say he doesn't know." She looked at Scarlett with the precise directness of someone being helpful. "It's okay. I do it too sometimes." Scarlett was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What gave him away?" "He says it's slower than other things," Mia said, "like he's thinking while he's talking." Scarlett glanced at Ethan. He shrugged. "You work a lot," Mia said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. "I do," Scarlett said. "My dad used to work so much I thought the shop was his other family. Then he figured out that wasn't working." "What changed?" Mia thought about this seriously. "He started coming to my school things," she said. "And he learned to do my hair. He's better at it now than he used to be." She paused. "He watched a lot of videos." Scarlett smiled. Not the composed professional version, something smaller, involuntary. Ethan saw it happen from where he was sitting on the dock post, and he noticed it with a quiet that sat in his chest before he could decide what to do with it. "Your dad sounds like he figured some things out," Scarlett said. "Some things?" Mia allowed. "Not all things." "None of us do," Scarlett said. Mia considered her for another moment, the way she considered people she wasn't sure about yet. Then she said, "You can borrow my book about butterflies if you want. It's really good," and turned back to looking at the water, which, in Mia's economy, was the highest available endorsement. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. It accumulated in the way these things did, not with any formal arrangement, but with the momentum of things that kept happening. He took her car in again. Routine service, nothing wrong, just the 300-mile follow-up he'd recommended, and she was in the building when he arrived and came down to the lobby herself, which Charlotte, who handled his invoice, appeared to find notable. She called him on a Wednesday evening about nothing specific. She'd had a bad meeting and was in the car and said she dialed him almost by accident, which he recognized as a thing people said when they'd meant to do something and wanted an exit if it went badly. He talked to her for 40 minutes in the parking lot behind the shop because Darnell had already locked up and the lot was quiet. She told him about the bad meeting without the professional filtration she used most of the time. He told her about a 1969 Camaro that had come in that afternoon, the kind of restoration job he hadn't had in 2 years, and she asked questions about it that turned out to be real questions, not social ones. He didn't call it anything. He wasn't good at calling things what they were before he was sure of them. They had dinner once, in the city. She'd suggested a restaurant that was significantly above his usual price range, and he'd said so directly, and she'd suggested a different one 2 blocks away that turned out to be a diner with very good pie, which he suspected she'd known all along. He ordered coffee. She ordered coffee and also the pie. They talked until the diners started flipping chairs and the counter guys started giving them pointed looks. She was different in those low-pressure contexts, without the board meetings and the family dynamics, and the things she'd needed him for in the first place. Less edited. She had a dry, clipped humor that she deployed sparingly and that landed every time because it was specific rather than performed. She was hard on herself in ways she didn't seem aware of, speaking about her own decisions with a precision that was sometimes clinical enough to sound like someone else's failures. He noticed it and filed it away because it wasn't his place to say anything yet. He said it anyway, once, in the car after the diner. "You're harder on yourself than you'd be on anyone else," he said. She looked at him. "That's how it's supposed to work." "Is it?" "If I held my team to the standard I held myself, I'd have no team," she said. "Someone has to carry the hardest version. That doesn't mean you have to like doing it." She was quiet for a second. "I don't particularly," she said, and then looked out the window, and that was the end of that. But something in the way she said it, the absence of the usual architecture around it, told him it was real in a way most of what she said wasn't yet. Mont. The call that changed the week came on a Thursday. Ethan was under a Jeep with a fractured CV axle when Darnell appeared at the edge of the lift and said, "There's a woman here. Not your usual. She came in a black car." He came out from under the Jeep, wiped his hands, and walked to the front. It was Charlotte Reed, Scarlett's assistant, standing in the small waiting area of the shop with the carefully neutral expression of someone delivering a message they hadn't been briefed on fully. She was holding an envelope. "Ms. Hayes wanted you to have this," she said. "She's in meetings all day, or she'd have called." He opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on heavy paper, Scarlett's handwriting, which was precise and slightly angular, and a single access card for the Crestfield Holdings building. "There's a weekend event at my parents' house. Extended family, some family friends. My grandmother specifically asked that you and Mia come. My mother called 3 times. I'm not going to tell you it's necessary. It's not. But I wanted to ask directly instead of by text. Saturday at noon. Bring Mia if she wants. S." He turned the access card over in his hand. Charlotte was watching him with polished neutrality. "She didn't have to send you all the way out here," he said. "She wanted to make sure you got it," Charlotte said simply. He thought about the note. He thought about the doc and Mia's borrowed butterfly book and the specific way Scarlett's face had changed when Mia wasn't looking. "Tell her we'll be there," he said. Charlotte nodded and left without further ceremony, which he respected. He went back to the Jeep. Darnell waited approximately 4 minutes before appearing at the edge of the lift again. "So what was that?" "Change of weekend plans. You're seeing someone." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to," Darnell said. "You've washed your truck twice this week." Ethan looked at him from under the Jeep. The truck was dirty. The truck is always a little dirty. That's its natural state. You care about how it looks when there's someone riding in it. Darnell crossed his arms. "I'm not judging, man. I'm just observing. Get back to the Tahoe." "Already done. Has been for an hour." Ethan came out from under the Jeep and stood up and looked at his employee, who had been with him for 4 years and occasionally read him better than most people he'd known longer. "It's complicated," Ethan said. "Things worth having usually are." "I didn't say it was worth having." Darnell gave him a long, patient look. You washed the truck twice. There wasn't a useful answer to that. Ethan picked up his wrench and went back to the axle. Saturday arrived with the kind of weather that made October feel like it was showing off. The drive to the lake was quieter than the first one had been, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not two people managing information, but two people who had run out of the things they'd been using to fill space. Mia was in the back seat reading about anglerfish, which she'd moved on to after finishing the butterfly book, and occasionally narrating facts about deep-sea creatures with the informational generosity of someone who thought everyone else should be as interested in anglerfish as she was. When they pulled up the gravel drive, Mia looked out the window at the house and said, "It's big." "It is," Ethan agreed. "Do rich people always have more house than they need?" "Not always," he said. "Sometimes they just have houses they've had a long time." Mia considered this. "Which one is this?" "This one," Ethan said. "I think is both." She nodded like she'd filed it away and opened the car door before he'd even turned off the engine. Scarlett was already on the porch, talking to a cousin Ethan didn't recognize when they pulled in. She looked up when she heard the truck. He noticed the small moment of it, the way her attention shifted, and then looked at Mia climbing out of the back seat with the anglerfish book under her arm, and something in her face went through a change so quick and unguarded that he almost missed it. He got out and walked toward the porch. Mia was already 3 steps ahead of him. He heard her introduce herself to Scarlett's cousin with the same unceremonious clarity she brought to everything. "I'm Mia. My dad fixed your boat." And then pointing at Ethan coming up the steps behind her. "He fixes things." Ethan reached the porch. Scarlett looked at him. "She's something," Scarlett said quietly. "I know," he said. "Thank you for coming." He looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he looked at things he wanted to understand, and thought about the access card and the handwritten note and the specific words she'd used, directly. She'd wanted to ask directly. Not through Charlotte's calendar, not through her mother's 3 phone calls. She'd written a note by hand and sent it across the city. "Thanks for asking," he said. It was a simple exchange, but it landed between them the way simple things did when they were actually about something else, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said so. Eleanor appeared in the doorway with the timing of a woman who had been watching from behind the screen door and had decided this was the right moment. "You brought the girl," she said, as if confirming a shipment. "She brought herself mostly," Ethan said. Eleanor looked at Mia, who was already looking back at her with the wide, assessing eyes of a person sizing up a potential ally. "You've got your father's face," Eleanor said. "I know," Mia said. "Everyone says that." "It's a good face." Eleanor held the door open. "Come in. There's food and the cousins are arguing about something stupid. You can help me ignore them." Mia walked through the door without a backward glance. Eleanor looked at Ethan and then at Scarlett, and then she made a sound that wasn't quite a word but communicated something definitive and went back inside. The porch held the afternoon light like it had been built for exactly this. For the end of things becoming beginnings, for the gap between what you'd planned and what you'd ended up with. Ethan stood in it for a moment before following everyone inside, and behind him the lake sat flat and quiet and enormous, holding its own counsel about everything it had seen from this particular piece of shore. The weekend was supposed to be simple. That was the word Scarlett used when she called him Friday evening. Simple, the way people used it when they were hoping to set an expectation that would hold. Her parents were hosting a small gathering, some extended family, a few long-standing family friends. Informal, relaxed. Eleanor had asked specifically for Mia, and her mother had planned a lake lunch that involved more food than 12 people could reasonably eat, which was apparently a Hayes family tradition regardless of occasion. Ethan had brought the Camaro in on Friday morning. Not the restoration vehicle, just a customer drop-off that smelled like the owner had been living in it. And he'd finished ahead of schedule, which was the kind of small grace the week occasionally gave him when it felt like it. He'd left Darnell to lock up, picked up Mia early, and they'd eaten dinner at the kitchen table with the windows open and the October air coming through, and Mia telling him about a conflict with her friend Jada that was apparently ongoing and complex and required detailed summary. He'd listened. That was most of parenting, he'd figured out. Not fixing. Listening until the person across from you finished saying the thing, and then saying something honest back. He thought about that on the drive up Saturday morning, about the difference between fixing and listening. He'd spent most of his life being the first kind of useful, the kind that involved his hands and a clear problem and a solution that either worked or didn't. The second kind was harder to measure. You didn't always know if you'd done it right. Mia fell asleep in the back seat somewhere around mile 20, the anglerfish book open on her lap, and Ethan drove the rest of the way in the particular quiet of a parent watching the highway open up ahead of them, and feeling, for a moment, the full weight and lightness of the life they'd built on their own. He was almost to the gravel drive when his phone lit up on the dash. Scarlett's name. He answered through the truck speakers. "We're 5 minutes out." Her voice came through tighter than he expected. "Something's happened. I need to tell you before you get here." He checked the rear view. Mia was still asleep. "Tell me." "There's a situation with the company. It started yesterday afternoon, and it's gotten worse overnight. I don't want it to affect the weekend, but my CFO called this morning, and I may need to step away a few times to handle calls." A pause. "I wanted to warn you." "Okay," he said. "That's all you're going to say?" "You said you wanted to warn me. I'm warned. What's the situation?" A brief silence, like she was deciding how much to say. "The Aldrin merger. We've been working on it for 8 months. It's a $1 billion acquisition, and it closes in 3 weeks. Yesterday, documentation from our internal due diligence process appeared on a financial news outlet. Information that was supposed to be confidential. Her voice had the precise flatness of someone containing something larger beneath it. The story ran this morning. It implies the merger is structurally flawed, and that I knew about it and concealed it from the board." Ethan looked at the gravel drive turning off ahead of him. "Did you?" "No," she said. The word was short and had no performance in it, just a fact. "Then that's the answer." "Ethan, it's not that simple. Someone inside the company leaked that documentation, selectively. The parts that were released were pulled from a larger analysis that, in full context, says the opposite of what the article implies. But most people reading a news headline don't ask for context." He pulled into the drive and cut the engine. Mia stirred in the back seat but didn't wake. He looked out at the house, the oak trees, the familiar porch. "You know who did it?" he asked. "I have a suspicion. I don't have proof." "Then that's what the weekend is," he said. "Finding proof." Another pause, longer this time. "You make it sound straightforward." "I don't think it's straightforward," he said. "I just think complicated problems still have a first step." He opened the door quietly. "Come outside. Mia's about to wake up, and she's going to want to see the boat." The gathering was bigger than the last one. There were 15 or so people spread between the living room and the porch and the kitchen, which Diane was running with the same focused authority she brought to every domestic situation, periodically appearing in doorways to direct food and conversation like a general managing 2 fronts simultaneously. Gerald had claimed a chair on the porch with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who was content to let the event organize itself around him. Eleanor was inside on the good couch with Mia beside her, both of them examining something on Mia's phone with matching expressions of concentrated interest. Ethan moved through it easily, the way he'd moved through the first dinner, not trying to be anything in particular, just being present, shaking hands, answering questions honestly. 2 of the family friends had heard Scarlett mention the car repair and wanted to talk about their own vehicles, which he was genuinely happy to do. Gerald's brother asked about the Camaro restoration, and they spent 20 minutes on the porch talking about the mechanics of classic American muscle while the house hummed around them. Scarlett was there and not there. She was physically in the room, making conversation, helping her mother carry dishes, sitting at the lunch table with the appropriate proximity to him that they'd settled into over the past weeks. But every hour or so she would disappear briefly, and he'd see her through the window in a corner of the side garden with her phone pressed to her ear, and the line of her back would have that particular tension in it, the same tension he'd seen in the lobby of her office building on the first day, compressed tighter. She came back from the 3rd call with the expression of someone who had been told something that confirmed a fear they'd been hoping was wrong. He was washing his hands in the kitchen sink. Diane had recruited him into the dessert logistics, which he hadn't resisted. When Scarlett appeared in the kitchen doorway, waited for her mother to leave toward the dining room, and said quietly, "It's worse." He dried his hands. "How much worse?" The board chair called. 3 members have officially requested an emergency session Monday morning. There's a motion to pause the merger pending an internal investigation. She said it the way you said things when you were holding them at arm's length because bringing them too close would make them too real. If the merger pauses, the Aldrin side walks. We lose the deal. Crestfield takes a significant hit, and I take full responsibility publicly. She looked out the kitchen window at the lake. That's what someone wants. The person who leaked. Yes. Tell me about them, Ethan said. She looked at him. You're not a corporate lawyer. No, tell me anyway. She was quiet for a second, and then she sat down at the kitchen counter, not perfectly, half onto a stool, like she was sitting before she'd finished deciding to, and said, His name is Warren Finch, Senior Vice President of Corporate Development. He's been with the company for 6 years. He was one of 3 internal candidates for CEO when the board appointed me 4 years ago. Ethan looked at her. He wanted your job. He wanted the company. He's been... She stopped, started again. He's been professional, competent, nothing I could point to. But the merger was his project originally. He brought it to the table 18 months ago before I restructured the development team. When I took direct oversight of the Aldrin deal, he was moved to a supporting role. So he lost the credit. He lost more than credit. If the merger closes the way I've structured it, there are redundancies in the development division. His role gets significantly reduced in the merged entity. She paused. He knows this. He's known since July. Ethan was quiet, thinking. The documentation that was leaked, he said. How did it get out? That's what my legal team is trying to determine. It came from a secure internal server. Only 12 people had access to that file folder. Finch was one of them. Yes, but 3 others were too, and I can't go to the board Monday and say I think it was Warren Finch without something more than a reasonable theory and a motive. Ethan looked at the window over the sink, at the lake beyond the yard. He thought about the first time he'd looked under her car, the slow walk around it, the way a problem told you things if you watched it instead of immediately going for the wrench. Where's the original document? He asked. On the server, locked, the leaked version. I'm not talking about the leak. I'm talking about the original full analysis, the one that says the opposite of what was published. Who authored it? She frowned slightly. My internal legal team, with oversight from... She stopped. From Finch's division. He signed off on the executive summary. So he had access to the full document and the summary. Yes. And he knew that releasing only part of it would make it look like concealment. The kitchen was quiet. The sounds of the lunch gathering filtered through from the other room. Someone laughing, Eleanor saying something that made Gerald's brother respond with a noise of agreement. He chose which pages to release, Ethan said. Scarlett stared at him. How would you... Because it's the same as pulling a partial diagnostic on an engine and showing it to a customer without the full reading. The numbers look bad in isolation. In context, they tell a different story. He kept his voice level. Whoever selected those specific pages knew the full document well. They knew exactly which sections looked worst without the surrounding context. That's not a random leak, that's a curated one. Her expression had changed while he was talking. The flatness was still there, but something had shifted underneath it. We pulled the metadata on the leaked file, she said slowly. My legal team said the user access logs were wiped. Wiped or corrupted? She blinked. What's the difference? Wiping takes intention. Corruption can be accidental or faked to look accidental. If the logs were corrupted at a specific timestamp rather than deleted, that timestamp corresponds to when someone accessed the folder. He paused. I'm not an IT person, but I know cover-up signatures. You leave a different kind of trace when you're trying to look like you didn't do something than when you actually didn't do it. Scarlett was looking at him with an expression he'd seen from her exactly once before, in the lobby, when he'd answered, "What time are we leaving?" and she hadn't had a category for him yet. How do you know that? She said. The fleet service that called me last week. I've been looking at their vehicles. 3 of their maintenance logs were altered after the fact, different mileage than the actual wear suggests. Someone was hiding that the cars hadn't been serviced when they claimed. He shrugged. You learn to look for the seam, where the record stops matching the reality. She was silent for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and typed something. She typed for about 30 seconds with the fast, focused energy of someone who had figured out where to go and was going there. I'm sending a message to my IT security director, she said. I'm asking him to pull the corruption log on the access records, not just report that they were wiped. She finished typing. If you're right, I might not be, Ethan said. I'm not a corporate lawyer and I'm not in IT, but it's worth looking. If you're right, there's a timestamp. And the timestamp puts someone in that folder on the night before the article ran. She put the phone face down on the counter. And if that someone's credentials are the only ones that access those specific pages, then you have something to walk into Monday with. She exhaled, not dramatically, just the small physical sound of a person releasing something they'd been holding in their chest since the morning. You're not supposed to be this useful, she said. You hired me to fix things, he said. I hired you to deliver a car. Semantics, he said, and she almost smiled, and then Diane appeared in the doorway asking about the dessert plates, and the moment folded back into the ordinary logistics of the afternoon. The rest of the day ran on two tracks. On the surface, the gathering finished in the warm, low-key way of family lunches that go long. People moving from the table to the porch, conversations overlapping and dissolving and reforming, Eleanor falling asleep briefly in her chair and waking up without acknowledging it, Mia eventually migrating to the dock again where she sat in the afternoon light with her legs hanging over the edge and appeared to be conducting a serious internal monologue about something. Underneath, Ethan watched Scarlett. Not the way people watch someone they're worried about, but the way you watched a machine under load. Not for failure exactly, but to understand how it handled the strain. She was better at it than she let herself believe. He'd noticed this in the weeks prior, the gap between how she talked about herself under pressure and how she actually performed under it. She talked about herself like someone who had to manage every variable alone or they'd collapse. She moved through the day like someone who had absorbed the knowledge that some things couldn't be controlled and had made a provisional peace with it. But she didn't know that yet, or she knew it and didn't believe it. It was Philip who forced the other thing into the open. He'd been quiet most of the afternoon, which, based on Ethan's limited experience with him, was unusual. He'd spent most of lunch talking to one of Gerald's old business acquaintances in a corner, and Ethan had noticed once or twice that Philip's eyes went to Scarlett with the specific attention of someone monitoring a situation. At the time, he'd filed it away without drawing conclusions. Late afternoon, when most of the guests were gathering coats and saying their goodbyes, Philip found Ethan near the end of the porch, ostensibly to say he was leaving. "Good to see you again," Philip said, with the particular warmth of a person who means the opposite. "You too," Ethan said. Philip glanced toward the house. Scarlett was inside, helping her mother with the last of the cleanup. "You've been around a lot lately." "Some. Family events, lunches." He said it neutrally, which meant it wasn't neutral. "Everyone seems fond of you." "They're kind people." Philip looked at him sideways. "You hear about the thing with her company, the merger situation?" Ethan looked at him. "I don't follow corporate news." "It's been a rough week for her. These things happen. I'd imagine it's stressful when you're close to someone in her position, getting involved in the orbit of a situation like that." A brief pause. "I'm sure your own thing keeps you busy." Ethan recognized the structure of it, the particular architecture of a statement designed to make itself impossible to argue with because it hadn't technically said anything offensive. It was the same as Philip's crack at dinner about the CEO and the mechanic, dressed differently. The message underneath was consistent. You don't belong in this radius, and you should know it. "My thing does keep me busy," Ethan said pleasantly. "Thanks for the thought." Philip smiled. "Just looking out for Scarlett. She's had people attach themselves to her success before. It rarely ends well for either of them." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder once, lightly, and walked toward the door. Ethan stood on the porch and watched the lake for a moment. He wasn't angry. The irritation was there, but it was the shallow kind. The kind that came from recognizing a move you'd seen before, not the deeper kind that came from being actually hurt. Philip wasn't someone whose opinion had access to the places in him that mattered. What he was, though, was thinking. He was thinking about what Philip knew, because the thing Philip had said, the merger situation, rough week, he'd said it the way people said things they knew more about than they were pretending. Not just someone who'd read a morning headline, someone whose framing was specific. He was thinking about the 12 people with access to the secure folder. He was thinking about the particular timing of Philip appearing at this gathering, being quiet through lunch, watching Scarlett. He didn't say anything about it that afternoon. He didn't have enough to say. But he held it carefully, the way you held a thread before you knew where it led, because the wrong pull would break it, and the right pull would open something up. Scarlett got the message from her IT director at 6:15 that evening, sitting in the front seat of Ethan's truck while Mia was inside saying a protracted goodbye to Eleanor that had already lasted 20 minutes and showed no signs of concluding. She read it twice. Then she looked up. The corruption was time-stamped, she said. Thursday night at 11:47. The logs show a deletion attempt that didn't fully execute. They corrupted instead of wiping clean. Her voice was steady, but her hand on the phone wasn't quite. The credentials used to access the folder belonged to a secondary login registered to Warren Finch's account. Ethan nodded. Secondary logins are supposed to be for remote work, she said. Most senior staff have them, but rarely use them. If you wanted to access a document and obscure your primary credentials, you'd use the secondary. Except the secondary still leaves a record. You'd have to delete it. And if the deletion didn't work, there's a timestamp, he said. She sat with this for a moment. The lake was changing color as the evening came on, going from blue to something closer to pewter, and the dock lights were coming on automatically the way they did at dusk. It's not enough for criminal prosecution, she said. It might not even be enough for a board hearing. A defense attorney would argue the secondary credentials could have been accessed by anyone who knew Finch's password. Is that possible? It's an argument. Whether it's true is different. She looked at the house. But it's something. It's the seam, like you said. She turned to look at him. How did you know to look for that? I told you. You look for where the record stops matching the reality. You say it like it's simple. It's not simple. It's just, once you know there's a gap, you can measure it. He looked at the house, too. Your cousin Philip. She turned. What about him? He said something to me this afternoon on the porch, about the merger situation. He knew it was bad before the article hit your typical news cycle. He'd read it this morning like everyone else, but his framing was ahead of the reporting. He paused. How close is he to Finch? The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. He counted it. They were at the same MBA program, Scarlett said slowly. 15 years ago, I never thought... She stopped. Philip has been pushing my father to restructure the board for 2 years. He wants a seat. And if the merger tanks and your position weakens, the board would be more likely to listen to outside voices. She exhaled. This is speculative. Everything is speculative until you look at the records, Ethan said. But you have a leak, you have a timestamp, you have a motive, and you have a relationship between two people who both benefit from the same outcome. He kept his voice level. I'm not telling you what's true. I'm telling you what I'd look for next. Scarlett was quiet for a long moment. Her phone was still in her hand, the IT director's message still on the screen. In the house behind them, he could hear Mia's voice. She was apparently telling Eleanor something about anglerfish with the full narrative investment she brought to all important subjects. Monday morning, Scarlett said, the board session. You'll have the timestamp. What else do you need? I need the original document released in full, side by side with the leaked version, with a forensic annotation showing what was omitted and why the omissions are materially misleading. She was thinking out loud now, the professional layer back on but different. Not the armor he'd seen at her office, but something more like a tool she was using consciously. I need my legal team tonight. Then you should call them. I know. She didn't move for another moment. She was looking at him with the expression he couldn't always name. The one that appeared in the gaps between the version of her that ran meetings and the one that sat on a truck tailgate and ate diner pie. You keep doing this, she said. Doing what? Seeing things. She said it quietly, without any performance. That other people walk past. He didn't have an answer for that. It wasn't really a question. He looked at the house instead, at the warm light in the windows and the shapes of people moving around inside, and thought about the drive home that was still ahead of them, and Mia's voice describing anglerfish to a 92-year-old woman who was probably completely absorbed. "Call your lawyers," he said. She nodded. Then she looked at the house one more time. "She's going to be difficult to get out of there." "Yeah," he said. "Eleanor might just keep her." "My grandmother has strong opinions about people worth keeping." She said it without any particular weight, looking at the house. And he wasn't sure if she knew what she'd just said or whether she'd meant it to land where it did. But either way, it sat between them in the truck with all the complicated warmth of something true that neither of them was ready to name. She got out of the truck and walked toward the house to make her calls. He sat in the quiet and watched the lake go dark at the edges, the dock lights reflecting in long, wavering lines across the water. And somewhere inside the house, his daughter was holding court in front of a woman who'd lived 92 years and apparently still found things worth staying awake for. The night had a particular weight to it, the kind that came before things changed. He'd felt it before. Standing in a hospital hallway at 28 with a doctor speaking words he was trying to organize into meaning, standing outside a real estate office signing papers on a building he wasn't entirely sure he could afford, standing in a doorway watching a 4-year-old girl sleep after a day that had broken both of them open. He didn't know what Monday would bring. He didn't know what the timestamp proved, or how far the thread went, or whether the woman now standing in his peripheral vision through the living room window, phone to her ear and legal team on the line, was walking into something that would hold or something that would break. What he knew was the same thing he'd always known. You showed up, you looked at the problem without flinching, you found the seam. The rest you figured out when you got there. Sunday passed in the specific way that days before important things passed. Not slowly, exactly, but with a kind of heightened texture to ordinary moments, like the volume on everything had been turned up a notch without any single thing being louder. Ethan took Mia to her Sunday morning soccer practice, stood on the sideline in the cold with the other parents, handed her water when she came off at halftime, and watched her argue a call with the referee with a conviction that was slightly disproportionate to the stakes of 8-year-old recreational soccer. He didn't intervene. She wasn't wrong about the call, and she made her case clearly and then let it go, which was more than most adults managed. On the drive home, she asked him about Scarlett. Not directly. Mia rarely came at things directly when she'd had time to think about them. She looked out the window for a while and then said, "Eleanor wants me to come back at Christmas." "That's up to the family," he said. "She said it was up to her. She said her house, her invitation list." "That sounds like Eleanor." Mia was quiet another moment. "Is Scarlett going to be in trouble? With her work?" He looked at her in the rear view. "Why do you ask?" "Because she was on her phone a lot yesterday, and you were talking seriously in the truck, and you had the face." "What face?" "The one where you're thinking about a problem." She pulled at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Is she okay?" "She's dealing with something hard," he said. "She's capable." Mia considered this. "You should help her." "I'm trying to." "I mean, help her, not just fix the thing." She looked at him. "Sometimes people need someone to stay while they figure it out, not just someone who figured it out for them." He didn't answer immediately. He watched the road, the Sunday streets quiet in that particular way they had, and thought about his 8-year-old daughter's observation that was somehow more precise than anything he'd managed to articulate to himself in 3 weeks. "When did you get so smart?" he said. "I've always been this smart," Mia said. "You're just catching up." Scarlett called at 9 Sunday night, after Mia was asleep. She'd been with her legal team since Saturday evening. Her voice was the voice of someone who had been talking for a long time and had moved past tired into the focused clarity on the other side of it. "We have the full forensic annotation done," she said. Side-by-side comparison of the leaked excerpt versus the complete document. "My legal team annotated every omission and what it misrepresents." A pause. "And the IT security director ran a full trace on the timestamp. The secondary credentials are definitively registered to Finch's account, and the access pattern matches his usual remote login behavior. Same IP range, same login window he uses when he works late from home." "That's enough for Monday," Ethan said. "It should be. My counsel thinks so." Another pause, this one longer. We also found the Philip piece. He straightened slightly. How? Communications audit. When legal flagged Finch's access credentials, they ran a parallel audit on his external communications from the 2 weeks before the leak. There were 3 encrypted messages sent to a private address registered to a holding company. The holding company traces back to Philip. The kitchen was dark except for the light over the stove, the way it always was when he sat up late. He thought about Philip's hand on his shoulder, on the porch, just looking out for Scarlett. He told Finch when to release it, Ethan said. We can't prove that specifically. But the communications pattern, 3 messages in the week before, nothing in the 6 months prior, is hard to explain innocently. My legal team is preparing a separate filing for the board regarding Philip's role. His board aspirations are effectively finished. How are you feeling about tomorrow? She was quiet for a moment. I've been in harder rooms, she said. I've been in rooms where I was actually wrong about something. Tomorrow I'm walking in with evidence and the truth. She stopped. That's a better position than I've been in before. Yeah, he said. My father called this evening. Someone told him what was happening. Probably my mother, who hears everything. He said, her voice shifted slightly. He said, go in tomorrow and let the facts speak first and your voice second. Which is what he always says. It usually annoys me. Did it this time? No, she said. This time it was right. The line held for a moment. He could hear her breathing, the small ambient sound of wherever she was. The city, probably, her penthouse that he'd never seen, somewhere above the noise with the lights of everything spread out below. You should sleep, he said. I know. Scarlett. Yeah. You've got this. He said it the way he said things he meant, without extra weight, just flat and true. The silence that followed it was the kind he'd gotten to know over these weeks. The one that happened when she was receiving something and not deflecting it. Good night, Ethan, she said. Good night. He heard nothing Monday until 2 in the afternoon. He worked through the morning, the Camaro restoration, which was in the bodywork phase now, and required the kind of patient incremental attention that suited his state of mind, and didn't check his phone more than twice an hour, which for him was restraint. Darnell noticed the frequency and said nothing, which was its own form of commentary. At 2:17 his phone buzzed. It's done. Call me when you can. He called immediately. She answered on the second ring, and her voice was different from the night before, still controlled, but with something under it that was looser, the way a rope went when the tension was released. Walk me through it, he said. We went in at 9, board chair, 7 members, my legal counsel, Finch. A breath. He came in expecting to make a case. He had his own counsel and a prepared statement about the company's risk management failures. He was going to use the hearing to argue the merger should be paused and my oversight reviewed. And? My team presented the forensic analysis first, full side-by-side document comparison, with the annotations showing the materiality of each omission, then the IT security report, the timestamp, the secondary credentials, the access pattern. She paused. Then the communications audit. How did he respond? He tried to argue the secondary credentials were a security vulnerability, that someone could have used his login without his knowledge. His counsel made that case for about 10 minutes. A short silence. Then my IT director played the access metadata, which showed the login originated from the same residential IP address that Finch uses consistently for all his remote work, including, coincidentally, the night he emailed 3 board members about the merger's progress 2 weeks ago from that same IP address. So the same router, his house. Her voice had a specific quality now, not triumphant, nothing that theatrical, just the stripped-down satisfaction of a fact doing its job. His counsel asked for a recess. They came back 20 minutes later and Finch submitted his resignation effective immediately. Ethan set down the wrench he'd been holding. The board voted unanimously to continue the merger on schedule, Scarlett said. The board chair issued a statement to Aldrin's team by 11:30 clarifying that the published reports misrepresented the due diligence findings. Aldrin confirmed their position an hour ago. The deal is intact. And Philip? My legal team filed a separate brief with the board regarding his role in the communications. He's denying knowledge of what Finch intended to do with the messages. Whether that's true or not, she paused. The board will decide. He won't be getting a seat. My father called him this afternoon. How did that go? My father is very quiet when he's genuinely angry. He's one of those people who gets more specific when he's upset. Philip apparently cried. She said it without pleasure, but without pretending she felt none. My grandmother was told this morning. She said, I never liked his handshake, which I think means she saw something in him a long time ago and kept it to herself. Eleanor usually does? Yes. A small pause. The authorities are involved now. Finch's legal exposure goes beyond the company. The selective leak to a financial publication potentially constitutes market manipulation. That's out of my hands. Their hands now. Ethan looked at the Camaro's chassis in front of him, the raw metal where the old bodywork had been stripped back, the honest bones of something waiting to be rebuilt. He thought about all the things this moment contained. 8 months of a billion-dollar deal, her company's stability, her name in a news article framing her as the problem. All of it traced back to one man's resentment and another man's opportunism and a timestamp that hadn't deleted cleanly. You did that, he said. My legal team did most of Scarlett, you did that. A brief silence. You told me where to look, she said. You knew how to look. I just said what I'd look for. He leaned against the workbench. There's a difference. You walked into that room with all of it, and you made the case. That was you. She was quiet for longer this time. He let it sit. I want to, she started, then stopped, then started differently. I want to say thank you in a way that doesn't feel like I'm settling an account, because that's not what it is. I know what it is, he said. Do you? He thought about Mia in the back seat the day before. Sometimes people need someone to stay while they figure it out. Yeah, he said. I think so. Another one of those silences. The good kind. The kind that had weight in it without being heavy. I'm taking the week to breathe, she said. I have 1,400 emails, 3 interviews to decline, and a VP of corporate development position to fill. But after that, she stopped. I'd like to come to Cartwell. He waited. Not for work, she said. Just to... She seemed to be searching for the right word and choosing honesty over the right word. I just want to come to where you are. He looked at the open bay door of his shop, the afternoon light coming in at a low angle the way it did in October, laying itself across the concrete floor in a long, flat rectangle. The smell of motor oil and metal and the cold air coming in off the street, the sounds of his shop, his building, his life. Come whenever you want, he said. But she came that Thursday. No announcement, no Charlotte calling ahead. She texted him at noon. I'm in Cartwell. Is the shop open? He texted back an address she already had, and 20 minutes later her car pulled up outside to, not the Bentley, a dark Audi, lower profile. And she walked in wearing jeans and a coat that looked expensive, even dressed down and carrying 2 coffees from a place on the main street that Ethan knew reasonably well. She handed him one and looked around the shop. He watched her look at it. The hydraulic lifts, the parts shelf along the back wall, the workbench with the Camaro's trim pieces laid out in order, the whiteboard Darnell used to track job status with a handwriting system that only made sense to him. The radio playing something indeterminate in the background. The smell of the place, which was just the honest smell of work. This is yours, she said. Since 2019. You bought it from the man who taught you. Kowalski. Yeah. She walked a few feet further in, not touching anything, just looking. It's different from how I imagined it. How'd you imagine it? Smaller? She turned to look at him. It's a real operation. 6 years of real operation, he said. Darnell appeared from around the lift, saw Scarlett, assessed the situation in approximately 1 second, and said, I'm going to get lunch, with the focused energy of someone removing themselves from a scene they had correctly read. The shop quieted. Ethan drank his coffee and watched her take in the Camaro, the stripped body, the chassis, the meticulous organization of parts laid out in the sequence they'd be reinstalled. 69, she said. He looked at her. You know the body style? My grandfather had one. 68, midnight blue. He sold it before I was old enough to remember, but my father talked about it like it was a relative. She crouched slightly to look at the chassis line. What happened to it? Previous owner bought it as a project and ran out of patience. Engine's actually solid. It's the body that took the damage. Rust along the quarter panels, some structural work in the floor. Takes time. You like the ones that take time, she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer it like one. You learn more from them, he said. The quick jobs pay the bills, the long ones. You learn what something is actually made of. She straightened and looked at him, coffee in both hands, and there was a quality to the moment that was different from every other moment they'd had in 6 weeks. Different from the lobby and the dinner table and the dock and the truck. There was no occasion to it. No gathering to navigate, no board meeting looming, no family dynamic to read. There was just his shop and 2 coffees and a half-rebuilt car and the specific weight of 2 people who had run out of pretexts. I'm not good at this part, she said. What part? She looked at the Camaro instead of him. The part where things stop being about circumstances and start being about... She stopped. About what they actually are, he offered. She looked at him. Yes? He set his coffee on the workbench. Why aren't you good at it? Because I'm good at everything that can be measured, she said. Outcomes, performance, risk assessment, things with a clear result you can point to. She turned her cup in her hands. This doesn't have a clear result. I don't know the metrics. There aren't any. I know, that's what I'm saying. He looked at her for a moment. When you drove your car hard enough to crack the oil pan, he said, what were you thinking about? She frowned slightly. You weren't thinking about the car, he said. You were thinking about whatever was in your head, and the car was just what was underneath you. Sometimes we run things hard without knowing what it's costing. He paused. I'm not saying that's you. I'm just saying, some things get missed when you're only looking at the metrics. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she said quietly, what did I miss? I don't know. That's yours to figure out. He picked up his coffee again. But I've been here the whole time. I'm not going anywhere. The radio did whatever it was doing. The light in the bay shifted as a cloud moved. Somewhere on the street outside, a truck downshifted. She set her coffee down on the workbench next to his. Mia told Eleanor that you learned to do her hair from YouTube videos, she said. Eleanor said it was the most human thing she'd heard in years. Eleanor's standards might be high. Eleanor's standards are exactly right. She was looking at him with the expression he'd stopped trying to name and just let be what it was. I've been in this city for 10 years. I have an office on the 32nd floor and a Rolodex that would make most people nervous, and I've been very good at the parts that can be measured. And the other parts? He said. She was quiet for a moment. I'm still figuring those out. She looked at him, like someone else I know. He almost smiled. Took you 6 weeks to throw that back at me. I was waiting for the right moment. Was this it? She looked around the shop, the Camaro, the parts shelf, the whiteboard, the October light falling across the floor, and then back at him with an expression that was the most unguarded he'd ever seen from her. Not the composed CEO, and not the woman managing a difficult dinner, and not the person running crisis communications at 11 at night. Just her, figuring it out. Yeah, she said. I think it was. Thoughts. She stayed 3 hours. Darnell came back from lunch, took one more read of the room, and discovered a pressing need to deep clean the tool storage that kept him occupied at the far end of the shop for the duration. Ethan showed her what he was doing with the Camaro, not as a demonstration, just because she asked real questions and he answered them. And there was something unexpectedly easy about talking through a restoration with someone who listened the way she did, with the full attention of someone who genuinely wanted to understand. At some point, she called her mother. He didn't mean to overhear it, but the shop wasn't large and she stepped just outside the bay door rather than far away, and the call was brief. He caught, I'm in Cartwell, Mom, and... Yes, I know. And then something he didn't catch, and then a pause, and then... I know. I think so too, said quietly. The way things were said when they were true. When she came back in, he was torquing a bracket on the Camaro floor and didn't look up immediately. My mother says hello, Scarlett said. Tell her hello back. She also says she's already planning Christmas. He looked up. Scarlett had her coat back on, which meant she was getting ready to leave, and she was looking at him with the small private smile she had when something amused her, and she wasn't hiding it. "I didn't say yes to Christmas," she said. "I'm giving you full information. What you do with it is your business." "That's generous of you." "I thought so." She picked up her car keys from the workbench where she'd set them and looked at the Camaro one more time. "When will it be finished?" "January, if everything goes right. February if it doesn't." "What color?" "Original spec. Fathom green with black rally stripes." She nodded like she approved, which she probably had no strong opinion about and was just being kind. He noticed the difference and liked that it was there. "Thank you," she said. "For Monday. For the timestamp thing. For—" She stopped and started again. "For all of it. The whole— everything. You don't have to keep thanking me." "I know. I want to." She met his eyes. "There's a difference." He held her gaze for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "There is." She walked to the bay door. At the threshold she turned back once, the afternoon light behind her, Cartwell's main street going about its business in the background. "I'll call you," she said. "I know you will," he said. And she left. He stood in the shop for a minute after her car disappeared from view, one hand resting on the Camaro's frame, the bare metal cool under his palm. He thought about the morning she'd walked into his life in a lobby that smelled like money, needing a favor he'd agreed to without thinking. He thought about his daughter's voice in the back seat. Sometimes people need someone to stay. He thought about a 92-year-old woman saying, "You have a direct face," and meaning it as the highest available compliment. He thought about how you couldn't plan the things that mattered. You could build the shop and maintain the lifts and do the work correctly and be present for the small daily things that added up to a life. But the things that came and changed the shape of it, those arrived like a call about a cracked oil pan, unexpected, requiring your attention, asking you to show up without the full picture. And sometimes you said, "What time are we leaving?" before you thought it through. And it turned out to be the truest thing you'd said in years. Darnell came back from the storage area, looked around the empty shop, and looked at Ethan. "She gone?" "Yeah." "She coming back?" Ethan picked up his wrench and turned back to the Camaro. "Yeah," he said. "She is." Darnell nodded slowly. "I'll deep clean the storage again when she does." "I appreciate that," Ethan said. And the shop went back to its work, the radio filling in the quiet, the October light moving across the floor the way it did every afternoon at this hour, steady and indifferent and exactly enough. She called that Sunday like she said she would, and the Sunday after that, and the one after that. It wasn't a formal arrangement. There was no conversation where they established what they were doing or put a name to it. It accumulated the way real things did, not through declaration, but through repetition, through the slow addition of one ordinary moment after another until the weight of them meant something. She came to Cartwell twice more in November, once on a Wednesday evening, appearing at the shop an hour before close with takeout containers from a Thai place she'd found on the main street, and an expression that said she'd had a long day and didn't want to explain it yet. They ate at the workbench with the Camaro in the background, and she unwound gradually, the way people did when they'd been in performance mode for 12 hours and needed somewhere to simply stop. He didn't ask questions she wasn't offering answers to. She talked when she wanted to and was quiet when she didn't, and neither required management. The second time she came on a Saturday and Mia was home. Mia answered the door before Ethan could get to it, because she always answered the door, and looked up at Scarlett with the particular assessment that she reserved for things requiring a considered opinion. "You came back," Mia said. "I said I would," Scarlett said. Mia looked at her for another second. "Dad made chili. There's enough." Scarlett looked past Mia to where Ethan was standing in the kitchen doorway, dish towel over his shoulder, watching this exchange with the particular helpless attention of a parent who knows better than to intervene. "Chili sounds good," Scarlett said. Mia stepped back to let her in. "You can put your coat there," she said, pointing at the hook by the door, the one that had a small ceramic hook shaped like a fish that Mia had made in second grade and which had hung there since. "We're watching a documentary about the Pacific after dinner." "What's it about?" "Everything that lives down there. You probably don't know most of it." Probably not, Scarlett agreed without offense. That's okay, Mia said generously. I'll explain the parts. Ethan went back to the chili. He heard them in the living room while he finished cooking. Mia's voice running a preview of the documentary's highlights, with the authority of a person briefing a junior colleague, and Scarlett's voice asking questions that were real questions, not the polite adult kind, the kind that showed she was actually following along. He stirred the pot and listened to the specific sound of his house with someone else in it, and it was different from the way it usually sounded, but not in a way that felt wrong. In a way that felt like something that had been missing so gradually he'd stopped noticing the absence. After dinner and the documentary, during which Mia delivered a running commentary, and Scarlett admitted without being defensive about it that she had not in fact known most of it, Mia went to bed with the self-sufficient pragmatism she brought to bedtime on nights when she'd had enough day and was ready to be done with it. She hugged Ethan, which was standard. She hugged Scarlett, which was not standard, and which Scarlett received with a stillness that was different from her usual composed stillness, something surprised and careful about it, like a person who hadn't expected to be reached and didn't want to move wrong and lose it. After Mia was down, Ethan made 2 cups of coffee and they sat at the kitchen table and talked until midnight. Not about work, not about the merger, not about any of the external things that had been the occasion for all their prior time together. Just talked. About his years working under Kowalski and what it had taught him about patience. About Scarlett's first year running the company, the specific terror of having full accountability and no one to defer to when she wasn't sure. About Sophie, not a long conversation, just an honest one, the kind that acknowledged the shape of absence without requiring it to be resolved. About Mia at 4 years old, right after, when she'd spent 3 weeks asking every morning if today was the day her mom was coming back, and Ethan had answered every time with the same words because they were the only true ones. She's not coming back, baby, but I'm right here. About how that had felt to say. About how it had slowly stopped being unbearable and started being just true. Scarlett listened to that last part without filling the silence after it, which was the right thing. You stayed, she said eventually, meaning not physically, meaning the other kind. Didn't have another option I wanted, he said. She turned her coffee cup on the table. I think I've been operating on options I was willing to tolerate, she said, for a long time. Things I was fine with, things that worked, technically. She paused. Tolerating things is not the same as actually being in your life. He looked at her. No, it's not. I've been in my life very efficiently, she said, with a dryness that was covering something more vulnerable underneath it, without being particularly present in it. He didn't tell her she was wrong about that. She wasn't. He didn't tell her it was fine or that she was too hard on herself. Both of those would have been polite, and neither would have been useful. He just said, that's a hard thing to see clearly about yourself. It's easier when someone holds still long enough that you can see the difference, she said. And the way she said it, not looking at the cup but at him, directly, without the professional layer and without the guard, meant something that they both understood and neither needed to say out loud yet. December in Cartwell was the kind of cold that came with clarity. The town lit its main street the first weekend of the month, the kind of lights that had been going up on the same hooks for 20 years. And there was a Saturday market that ran through the month with a particular organized chaos that Mia loved, because there were samples of things, and she had strong opinions about all of them. Ethan had taken her every year since she was 5, and this December he mentioned it to Scarlett without framing it as an invitation or a non-invitation, just mentioned it the way you mention things to someone who was increasingly part of the texture of your days. She showed up. Not in the Audi. She'd taken a car service and walked up from where it dropped her and found them at the second booth of the market, Mia in the middle of an in-depth evaluation of a local honey vendor's product range, and Scarlett appeared at Ethan's shoulder and he handed her a coffee from the cup he'd just bought as if he'd known she was coming, which he had, in the way you knew things you hadn't been told directly. Which one's she gonna pick? Scarlett said, watching Mia cross-examine the vendor. The one she already decided on before the tasting, Ethan said. She just likes the process. Scarlett smiled. The market moved around them, families and couples and the particular December energy of people who were pleased to be out in the cold, And Scarlett stood next to him and looked at all of it with the expression of someone who was noticing something for the first time and wasn't entirely sure what to do with the noticing. "You grew up in a place like this?" she asked. "This one, actually. Born here, moved away for a few years, came back when Mia was 2. He watched Mia finalize her honey selection with great ceremony. Felt like the right place to raise her. "Did you ever think about leaving again, after Sophie?" "All the time," he said. "Leaving feels easier when things are bad. Different place, different version of you." He drank his coffee. "But different isn't always better, and Mia had roots here. Her mother's family is here. Some things you don't move." Scarlett was quiet for a moment. "I've moved a lot," she said. "Not physically, but I've moved past a lot of things. Gotten efficient at it." She turned the coffee cup in her hands, a gesture he recognized now as the physical thing she did when she was working something out. "I'm not sure everything should be moved past." He looked at her sideways. "What things?" She watched Mia come trotting back with a jar of wildflower honey held up like a trophy. "I'll tell you later," she said. And then Mia arrived and launched into a full account of why this specific honey was superior to the others, and the moment folded into the ordinary forward motion of the afternoon. But she did tell him later. They were walking back through the lit street toward where she'd be picked up, Mia running slightly ahead the way she always did, and Scarlett talked about Marcus, her last relationship, the 2 years, the gradual understanding that he'd been interested in what proximity to her could build for him, not in her. She didn't say it with much bitterness. Mostly she said it with the tired honesty of someone who had finished being angry about something and was left with just the fact of it. She said she'd known earlier than she admitted it to herself, which she found more frustrating than the betrayal, the time she'd spent with the wrong version of the truth. "The efficient moving past thing," he said. "Yes, I'd already moved past the relationship before I ended it. I just didn't tell anyone, including myself." She looked at the lights on the storefronts. "That's a bad habit." "A lot of people have it." "I know, it's still a bad habit." She looked at him. "I'm trying to do the opposite of that. Lately." He met her eyes. "How's it going?" "Terrifying," she said simply. "And better." Mia, ahead of them, turned back and yelled, "You guys are walking so slow." "We're talking," Ethan called. "You can talk faster." Scarlett laughed. The real one. Not the professional one, the one that appeared when something caught her off guard. She looked at Mia and then at Ethan with light from the street doing something warm to her face, and he thought, there it is. That was the thing. Not the lobby version, not the 32nd floor version. That right there. The woman who didn't have it all figured out and wasn't pretending otherwise, and was standing on a cold street in a small town that wasn't hers, laughing at an 8-year-old's impatience with the completely unguarded look of someone who had stopped managing what they felt. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't need to, yet. Christmas at the Lake House was Diane Hayes' production in the fullest sense. She had asked, then asked again, then called Gerald to ask on her behalf, and Gerald had called Ethan directly with a message that was 4 words, "Just come. Bring Mia," which was the most unambiguous invitation Ethan had ever received, and which he respected accordingly. Philip was not there. That absence had its own particular quality, noticeable, neither mourned nor celebrated, just the empty space of a thing that had been removed. Ethan didn't bring it up. Nobody did. Amanda was there, Philip's sister, who it turned out was significantly more pleasant without her brother in the room, and who spent most of Christmas Eve in the kitchen with Diane in a way that suggested she'd been waiting for years to participate in the gathering without the specific energy her brother always brought. Eleanor was there on the good couch, wearing a red cardigan and the good earrings Mia had admired, and when Mia came in, she held out her arms in a way that Mia walked straight into without hesitation, and they looked so completely natural in that position that Gerald had to turn away briefly toward the window. Christmas morning, Mia was up at 6 with the unstoppable momentum of a child who had been patient for 24 days and was done being patient. Ethan managed to redirect her until 7, which he considered a personal achievement. They were at the lake house by 10, and the day was the kind of long family day that ran on food and conversation and the particular warmth of people who had decided to belong to each other for the duration of it. Scarlett gave Mia a book. a hardcover natural history of deep-sea creatures, illustrated, the kind you could tell had been chosen by someone who'd been paying attention. Mia opened it, looked at the cover, looked at Scarlett, and said, "This is the exact right one," with the reverence she reserved for things that fully met her expectations, which was not frequent. Scarlett had the expression of someone who had gotten something more right than they'd aimed for and didn't know what to do with that. Ethan watched this from across the room and felt something settle in his chest. Not the anxious kind of settling, not the provisional kind. The other kind. The kind that came when something complicated had gradually resolved into something simple. That evening, after dinner, they walked down to the dock. It was the three of them. Mia in the middle, as she tended to be, holding both their hands at her own initiation, the lake flat and dark and enormous around them, the dock lights doing their reflection thing that Mia had described to Eleanor back in November as the lake making copies of the stars, which is ambitious. Mia sat on the edge of the dock, legs over the water, looking out. Ethan and Scarlett stood a few feet behind her, close enough that his shoulder was against hers, and the cold was the kind that required proximity. "You're staying tomorrow?" he said. "If that's still okay." "I told you it was. You told me in October." "Same answer." She looked at the water. "My mother asked me this morning if I was happy." He waited. "I told her yes," she said, without thinking about it, that's not how I usually answer things. She looked at him. "I think about everything. I run scenarios, I factor for the downside." A small beat. "I just said yes." "Was it true?" "Yeah," she said. It was. Below them, Mia looked up from the water. "You're doing the quiet talking thing again?" she said. "We're allowed to do that," Ethan said. "I know, I'm just noting it." She looked back at the lake. Eleanor says when people go quiet together, it means they're saying the things that matter. Scarlett looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between moved and embarrassed and entirely genuine. "Eleanor says a lot of things," Ethan said. "Eleanor is usually right," Mia said with the tone of someone citing an established fact, and resumed her observation of the dark water. January brought the final stages of the Camaro. It was the kind of work that asked everything at the end. The fitment of the body panels, the alignment of the trim, the clear coat that had to be applied in exactly the right conditions and left to cure without interruption. Ethan had done this before, but it never got casual. Every car that went out of the shop was going out with his name on it. Not literally, just in the way that mattered. Scarlett came the Saturday he was finishing the clear coat. She didn't try to help, which was right. There was nothing to help with at that stage. You just watched and let the work be the work. She sat on the stool at the workbench with a coffee and watched him move around the car with the spray gun and didn't talk, which he appreciated more than he would have been able to explain. When he was done, he stepped back and looked at it. Fathom green. Deep, dark, like the sea before you could see the bottom. Black rally stripes. 17-inch restored wheels. Everything original spec, everything done correctly, nothing rushed. "That's beautiful," Scarlett said quietly, not performing the appreciation, just saying it. "It's a good car," he said. "You put months into it." "That's what it needed." She looked at him over the roof of the Camaro. "You say that about everything. That's what it needed. Like the thing tells you how much to give." "It usually does," he said. "How do you know when you've given enough?" He looked at the car. The clear coat still curing, the color shifting in the overhead light as he moved around it. "When it's right," he said. "You know, there's no particular moment. You just look at it and you know." She was quiet. He looked at her across the car, and she was looking back at him with the expression that had no name and no defense in it, and that he'd been learning to read for 3 months now. The one that showed up when she was entirely present, not managing, not assessing, just there. He walked around the car to where she was standing. She didn't move back. They'd been in this particular proximity before, by the truck, on the dock, standing in the kitchen talking until midnight. And it always had the same quality, the specific charge of something that hadn't been said yet, but was there between them, patient, not demanding to be named before it was ready. He'd been thinking about how to say it. He'd thought about it while doing the bodywork, while cooking dinner, while watching Mia sleep in the back seat on the drives back from the lake. He thought about it the way he thought about hard repairs, not forcing it, just letting the right approach come to him when he stopped insisting on finding it. "I want to ask you something," he said. She looked up at him. "Okay. Not a favor, not a logistics thing." He put his hands in his pockets because he wasn't sure what to do with them otherwise, and he didn't want to perform this. He wanted it to just be true, the way the true things he'd said to her had always just been true. "This started because you needed someone for one night, and I said yes before you finished the sentence, which was—" He stopped. "That was not the most rational decision I've ever made." "No," she said, very quietly. "But it was the right one." He looked at her. "I want to keep saying yes. Not to favors. To the actual thing. To you, if you want that. To whatever this is, for as long as it goes." He paused. "I'm not good at the formal version of this. I don't have a speech." "I don't want a speech," she said. "I know, that's why I didn't prepare one." He looked at her steadily. "I'm asking if you want to be in this with me, for real. No occasion required." The shop was quiet the way it only got on weekends, the radio off, the street outside doing its own thing far enough away to be just background. The Camaro sat between them and the door, finished, cured, itself completely. Scarlett looked at him for a long moment. He watched her face move through something. Not uncertainty, more like a person arriving at a destination they'd been walking toward for long enough that the arriving felt both sudden and inevitable. "You asked before I did," she said. "Were you going to ask?" "I was working up to it." "How much longer did you need?" She almost smiled. "Not long," she said. "I was almost there." "Almost doesn't count." "No," she agreed. And then, without the professional layer, without the calculation, without any of the architecture she'd built around herself over years of being the person who had to have it all figured out. "Yes, I want this. I want in." He'd been holding something in his chest for 3 months without naming it. He named it now, quietly, just to himself, standing in his shop with the smell of clear coat in the air and the woman across from him who had walked into his life because her car needed fixing and had stayed because of something that didn't have a metric and didn't need one. He reached across and took her hand. She looked down at their hands and then up at him, and she didn't say anything else, and neither did he, and it was enough. It was exactly enough. Kevin. The Cartwell Summer Festival ran the 3rd week of July. It had been running for 30-some years on the same 3-block stretch of Main Street, and it had the particular texture of a community event that had never tried to be anything other than what it was. Local food vendors, a stage with a rotating cast of local musicians, a section for kids with games that had been slightly broken in the same ways for as long as anyone could remember, and fireworks over the park at 9:30 when the sky was fully dark. Ethan had taken Mia every year since she was old enough to stay up for the fireworks. This July she was 9, and she had opinions about the festival the way she had opinions about everything. The funnel cake stand was non-negotiable. The ring toss was rigged but worth attempting. The local band that played every year was actually pretty good for people who are not famous. Scarlett had been in Cartwell since Friday. Not because of the festival specifically. She'd been in Cartwell a lot since January, enough that Mrs. Patterson from next door had stopped treating her arrival as an event and started treating it as a pattern, which was Cartwell's particular way of accepting something into the fabric of things. She had a standing arrangement with a local woman named Rosa who did alterations and who had somehow become her person in the town in the way that people in small towns became your person, appearing at the right moments, providing local context, accepting her with the matter-of-fact warmth of someone who judged people by how they acted and not by where they came from. She'd had conversations with Gerald about the construction business that had gone on for hours, to Gerald's visible satisfaction. She'd had a standing phone call with Eleanor every Sunday that Ethan wasn't party to, but that Mia reported produced a lot of laughter from Eleanor's end when Mia visited the lake house. She'd missed Diane's spring garden party, but had sent flowers that Diane was still talking about in July, which said something about the flowers. She'd given a keynote in the city in March, 2 weeks after the Aldrin merger closed, and the piece that ran the next day described her as the architect of one of the year's most significant corporate acquisitions. He'd read it at the shop, proud in a way he didn't need to perform for anyone, just personally proud, and then put the phone down and gone back to work. Warren Finch had accepted a plea arrangement in April in connection with the market manipulation charges. Philip had resigned from 2 company boards he'd sat on, quietly, without public fanfare. The board seat he'd wanted had never materialized, would not materialize, and the part of the story that belonged to him had ended with the specific anticlimactic quality of most bad behavior when it was finally fully exposed. Not a dramatic fall, just a door closing and the room being the same without him in it. The festival smelled like fried food in summer and the particular warmth of a crowd that was there because it wanted to be, not because it had to be. Mia had located the funnel cake stand within 30 seconds of arrival and was eating it with the focused satisfaction of a person executing a plan. Scarlett was beside her, having accepted a piece that Mia had offered with the ceremonial gravity she brought to things she cared about, eating it with more composure than Mia but genuine enjoyment, powdered sugar on the cuff of her jacket, which she either hadn't noticed or had decided not to care about. Ethan watched the 2 of them from a few feet away. He thought, not for the first time, about the particular shape his life had taken, about the fact that you couldn't plan for the things that mattered most. You could only be in the right state to receive them when they arrived. He'd been a 28-year-old man in a hospital hallway trying to hold himself together for a 4-year-old who needed him to. He'd been a 30-year-old buying a building he wasn't sure he could afford from a man who trusted him. He'd been a 32-year-old delivering a car he'd repaired himself, walking into a lobby, answering a question he hadn't expected to be asked. He hadn't planned any of it. He'd just been there for all of it. And it had become a life that was, against the odds and the losses and the years of just holding on, genuinely good. The band started up on the stage, something with a guitar and a bass that the crowd around them received warmly. And Mia finished her funnel cake and announced she was going to the ring toss, and Scarlett followed her without being asked, and Ethan watched them negotiate the mechanics of the game together. Mia explaining the correct grip with the authority she brought to all expertise. Scarlett attempting it and missing, and Mia's unsentimental coaching. Try again, but don't think about it too much. The sky was getting toward that late July color. It had an hour before dark, deep and warm and not quite ready to let go of the light. He walked over to where Scarlett was standing after her 3rd attempt at the ring toss, Mia having moved on to a game involving rubber ducks that she'd declared more honest. "I can't get it," Scarlett said. "Nobody can. Mia's right. It's rigged." "Then why do people keep playing?" "Because winning a stuffed animal from a rigged carnival game is more satisfying than winning something easy," he said. "The difficulty is part of it." She looked at him sideways. "Is that a metaphor?" "Everything is a metaphor if you're not careful," he said. She laughed and gave him the rings, and he attempted 2 and missed both and handed them back, and the vendor watched them with the patience of a man who had watched people fail at his game for many years and found it genuinely entertaining. They drifted toward the stage as the light changed. Mia found them again and tucked herself between them in the crowd the way she'd started doing sometime in the spring, naturally, without announcement, as if this was simply where she went. Her hand found Ethan's. Her other hand found Scarlett's. She didn't make a thing of it. The band was playing something slow now, the kind of song that a festival crowd received by swaying slightly without realizing they were doing it. The fireworks were still an hour away. The sky was doing the thing it did in July when it finally decided to go dark, the color pulling back from the horizon in layers. Ethan looked at Mia, who was watching the stage with her particular focused attention. He looked at Scarlett, who was looking at the sky, her face relaxed in a way he associated now with her being somewhere she'd chosen to be, rather than somewhere she was performing for. He thought about what he'd said in January in the shop, with the Camaro between them. "I want to keep saying yes." He'd meant it then. He meant it more now, having had 6 more months of what yes looked like. The ordinary Tuesday calls and the difficult conversations, and the Saturday mornings when she was at his kitchen table with coffee and Mia's running commentary and the radio playing in the background, and the evenings at the lake house, and the way she'd gradually stopped treating his world like a place she was visiting and started treating it like a place she was in. He'd had the ring since April. He hadn't planned the timing down to the detail. He wasn't a planning every detail kind of person. He was more of a wait until it's right kind of person. The same as with the Camaro, the same as with the building, the same as with everything that mattered. You waited until you looked at it and knew. He knew. The band finished the slow song and moved into something with more energy, and the crowd responded, and Mia said, "Finally, something with a beat," with the critical authority of a 9-year-old music reviewer. Ethan looked at Scarlett. She looked back at him, and whatever she saw in his face made her expression change. Not alarmed, not anticipatory, just attentive in the specific way she got when she understood something was real and was receiving it fully. He reached into his jacket pocket. "This started," he said, "because you needed a boyfriend for one night." She went very still. "And I said yes before you finished telling me why, which was either the least considered thing I've ever done or the most honest." He looked at her the way he looked at things he wanted to understand completely. "I've been saying yes to everything since then, and I want to keep saying it. I want to keep saying it for as long as there is." He paused. "I'm not good at speeches. I told you that." "You told me," she said very quietly. "So I'm just going to ask." He opened the box. The ring was not elaborate. He'd thought about that, about the 32nd floor, and the merger, and the billion-dollar deal, and the world she occupied. And then he'd thought about Scarlett on a dock with her shoes off, and Scarlett eating pie at a diner counter at 11:30 at night, and Scarlett with powdered sugar on her jacket cuff not caring about it, and he'd found the thing that felt true. A solitaire, clean, the diamond catching whatever light was available and returning it without effort. He held it toward her. "Be my partner," he said. "Not for an occasion, not for the arrangement, for the rest of it." Mia, beside them, had gone completely quiet for the first time in recent memory. Scarlett looked at the ring and then at him, and her face was doing something that had no professional layer to it at all. It was just her, fully there, the woman he'd watched figure herself out across all these months. The one who was terrifyingly good at everything measured and still learning the parts that weren't. Her eyes were bright with something she wasn't trying to suppress. "You were supposed to let me get to it first," she said, which was not the thing he'd expected and which made him feel everything at once. "You were almost there," he said. "I went ahead." She exhaled. The small sound, the real one, the pressure releasing. "Yes," she said. "Ethan." "Yes." He put the ring on her finger. Mia made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a yell, and threw her arms around both of them at once, with the full commitment of a person who had been waiting for this conclusion and was not going to be restrained about it now that it had arrived. "Finally," Mia said, muffled against Ethan's jacket. "Finally," he said. "I've been waiting since October," she said, which was either true or a significant revision of history, and either way was extremely Mia. Scarlett was laughing and crying at the same time in the way people did when something got past all their defenses and they didn't have a response ready for it. She had one arm around Mia and one hand held up slightly, looking at the ring the way people looked at new things they were still making real in their minds. The fireworks started. They went up over the park in the full dark that had finally arrived, the crowd lifting its face to them, the light breaking in colors over everyone. Mia detached herself from them long enough to look straight up, mouth open, the fireworks reflected in her eyes. Ethan felt Scarlett's hand find his without looking. He held it. He thought about all the things that had not been planned. He thought about his daughter, who had grown up in the absence of one person and had never stopped being fully herself. He thought about the shop that was his, the building that was his, the town that was his, and now this woman with her hand in his watching the sky do something unrepeatable over a crowd that had no idea it was witnessing the precise moment a complicated thing became simple. He thought about Sophie, briefly and honestly, the way he always did at moments like this. Not with grief that blocked the present, but with the kind of love that had nowhere to go except to become part of who he was. Which meant it was in everything, including this. She would have liked Scarlett. She would have told him so directly and probably said something that embarrassed him, and then laughed about it. That was a fact he held quietly and let be true. The fireworks finished. The crowd applauded the way crowds always did at the end of fireworks, which was an interesting instinct when you thought about it. The clapping for something that was already over, as if to say, "That was worth it. We were here. We saw it." Mia turned back to them. She looked at Scarlett. She looked at Ethan. She looked at the ring. Then she nodded slowly, with the considered gravity of a 9-year-old delivering a verdict she'd been withholding for months. "We're a family," she said. Not a question, not tentative. Just a fact, said the way facts were said. Scarlett looked at her. Something moved across her face that no metrics could have predicted, and no amount of corporate preparation would have built her for. She crouched down to Mia's level and looked at her directly. "Yes," she said. "We are." Mia nodded once more, the matter settled, and turned toward the funnel cake stand. There was apparently a second funnel cake tradition that Ethan had not been informed of, and walked ahead of them into the dispersing crowd. Ethan and Scarlett stood in the middle of the festival, and the noise and the end of the fireworks and the beginning of everything else. "She's been waiting since October," Scarlett said. "She's more patient than she lets on," Ethan said. "She gets that from you." He looked at her. She looked back. The powdered sugar was still on her jacket cuff. The ring was on her finger. The band was starting up again somewhere behind them, and the town was settling back into its ordinary summer evening, and none of it was the life she'd planned, and all of it was what it was supposed to be. "Thank you," she said. Not for the ring, for the whole long answer to a question that had started in a lobby 6 months and a lifetime ago. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I know." She looked at him. "I want to." There was a difference. They both knew it. He took her hand and they walked toward the funnel cake stand, toward Mia, toward the rest of the evening and everything it connected to, and the festival moved around them with the comfortable noise of a community that had been here before them and would be here after, doing what communities did, holding people through the ordinary moments until the ordinary moments became the whole story, which was, in the end, all any story was. You couldn't plan the things that mattered. You could only be present enough to recognize them when they arrived. Grease on your knuckles, a receipt in your pocket, a woman in a lobby asking a question that didn't have a rational answer, and something in you that said yes before your brain could catch up. The best decisions sometimes felt like that. Not calculated, not weighed against the downside. Just yes. Before you finished thinking about it, which turned out to be exactly right.